A friend of mine who works at a daycare said it feels like every Monday through Friday is the same. So every Monday is whatever it is, chicken nuggets. Every Tuesday is spaghetti. That means those kids are getting a fairly small variety of foods. And again, that can contribute to picky eating because the less variety kids are given, the less they're going to eat and the more they're going to expect the same pattern over and over. And then when something tries to break that pattern, it's very difficult for them. You're listening to the Healthy Parenting Handbook podcast, just the thing we all said we needed when we first became parents. Remember saying it? Where's the handbook for this? I'm your host, Katie Kimball from Kids Cook Real Food, and I bring together experts in the fields of health, parenting, nutrition, and more to help you, parents who truly want to raise healthy, independent adults, get the information you need. My friends, parenting is the toughest and the most rewarding job in the world. I am in the trenches with you with my 4 kids. They are ages 10 to 19. And I just want to thank you for joining me to consult this Healthy Parenting Handbook, your guide to raising kids intentionally. Find the show notes for this episode at kidscookrealfood.com/038. It is episode 38, and your expert today is yours truly. I have been trained in the SOS approach to feeding on picky eating and, being a mom for 19 years, being a teacher before that, and working with thousands of parents throughout the world on how to help their kids build a really good and healthy relationship with food through my No More Picky Eating challenges and my Picky Eating Playbook membership. I've got a lot of background. And today I started ruminating on how kids eat, where they eat, and when they eat. And we know that research shows that parenting styles can't actually create a picky eater. So get that worry out of your head. That is not something to be concerned about. However, it's pretty clear to me that if kids do have some physiological root causes, like I talk about in my TEDx talk on picky eating. By the way, you can find that really easily. Just search on YouTube for my name, Picky Eating. It's got over 250,000 views at this point in late 2024. But I talk about the physiological root causes of picky eating in that TEDx. So I'm not going to go over them again today, but we know that kids have, they come with some raw ingredients, right? They're either going to potentially be a very preferenced / picky eater. Maybe they're automatically, naturally a very adventurous eater. Can we mold and shift them? Yes, it's not nature versus nurture. It's nature and nurture. So there are things that happen in our kids' environment, including the way we parent, the choices we make, the words that come out of our mouths, the foods we put on the table, the environment we create at the dinner table or lunch or breakfast, that can help solve the picky eating problem, that can help our kids build a better relationship with food, or that can exacerbate it, that can contribute to further more preferenced, more picky eaters. And I thought, what happens when kids eat at school? And specifically, what happens when they eat school lunches? And this would also apply, I think, to daycare lunches if your daycare is feeding all the kids the same food, because daycares can be really varied in the approach they take. So today I want to talk about 10 reasons that school lunch could possibly contribute to picky eating tendencies or increase picky eating preferences. These are not all going to happen for all kids. These are not all going to happen in all schools. I just think it's interesting to kind of dig in. Okay. I'm going to assume that you have a little bit of a background in what I teach about picky eating. If you don't, come join me. Twice a year, I host the No More Picky Eating Challenge. That is coming right up, kicking off October 1st and 2nd of this year, 2024. So if you're listening, soon after this episode is released, please right now, go to kidscookrealfood.com/picky challenge. Register yourself. It's completely free. You'll get 5 days of 20 to 30 minute challenge videos where I do some teaching. I do some really intense instruction, and then I give you an action step, something you can do that day in your home to help curb the picky eating problem, or really to say that in a better way, a positive way, to help your kids build a healthy, positive relationship with food. It's a long game. But in those 5 days of the challenge, people make vast steps. In fact, more than half the kids whose parents take the challenge try something new. But that's not even the point. That's not even the point of the No More Picky Eating Challenge. The point is that successfully 85% of parents in just 5 days, 5 action steps, feel less stress at the table. And guess what? That's contagious. Your kids then feel less stressed. And over time, when that becomes a consistent habit, and when some of the environmental routines that I teach you become consistent habits, your kids are more easily able to approach food with curiosity instead of fear. And it is a beautiful thing. So join that No More Picky Eating Challenge, kicking off October 1st and 2nd, 2024, kidscookrealfood.com/picky challenge. Today, we're talking about how potentially for some kids, school lunch may contribute to increased picky eating tendencies. Okay. The first point or the first factor is definitely the biggest one. And this is a little bit science geeky, so I hope you're ready to dig right in. Here's the thing. When kids eat food that always tastes the same, that is monochromatic, that is completely expected, that has no surprises, they learn to expect food that always tastes the same. Okay. If I go to my garden, my grocery store, my farmer's market, and I pick up a head of broccoli or a head of cauliflower or even a carrot, right? The quintessential kid vegetable, baby carrots. If I pick up different carrots from different places or on different days or even in the same bag, do they always taste and look and feel texture-wise exactly the same? Absolutely not, because things that grow in nature are by nature varied, right? They look different. They taste a little sweeter or they're a little crunchier or a little softer on each day. Highly processed foods, however, are made in factories and they're dialed in, right? I want to say generated because the word created didn't sound right. They're formulated. That's the best word. They're formulated to be exactly the same every time because that's what people expect when they buy a package of food. And in most school cafeterias, not all, and I'm speaking as an American about what I know about the US school food lunch system. Most schools are using highly processed foods. Okay. They are not making things homemade. Similarly, by the way, yeah, you grab a carrot from different places or, different carrots taste differently. Every time I make a recipe, does it taste exactly the same? Absolutely not, because it's going to be a little different because I'm human, because I'm not measuring perfectly, because I overcook it a little bit or I undercook something a little bit. And so we need our kids to be used to variety. We need our kids to expect that when they take a bite of food, even though it's the same, quote unquote, food that they may have had the day before or the week before, it might have a little bit of variation. And when kids always expect and know that they can expect exactly the same taste, texture, and look, it actually can help play into those picky eating tendencies because then they're going to be less likely and more fearful, less likely to encounter and eat and more fearful of foods that do have that variety. So could highly processed foods every single day at lunch contribute to picky eating? Maybe, possibly. And now I know, by the way, I know that a lot of schools also have whole fruits and sometimes whole vegetables, but in general, it's systematized so that they can scale. It's the only way they can do it, right? So those highly processed foods could play into the picky eating. Number 2, honestly, is the vegetables. It seems like there's a fairly small variety of vegetables, and worse, they're generally cooked in the least exciting way. They're generally boiled or they're canned or they're overcooked. And that makes sense too, because schools have to buy big cans from Cisco and GFS. They don't have the freezer space, right, to have those frozen vegetables. And they're not stir frying them for, 8 to 9 minutes so that they're bright green and al dente. It's just not possible at the scale and the speed at which, these lunch systems have to move. So I feel like school vegetables are kind of a nail in the coffin for kids enjoying vegetables because, again, very little variety, cooked in the least exciting way in my book. Could that contribute to picky eating? Maybe, because the opposite would then be a wide variety of vegetables cooked in very different ways, seasoned differently, roasted, stir-fried, fried in bacon grease in ways that are a little more exciting and approachable to kids. And that could help reduce the picky eating tendencies. I also think, and this is sort of number 3, schools have to include vegetables, right? Like they have their chart. It must have, I don't even know exactly, but it's 2 whole grains, right? A protein, a fruit, and a vegetable. But what counts as vegetables is often corn and potatoes, which are those really starchy vegetables. And this will slide right into number 4. Just they're the starchier vegetables, so they're a little bit easier on the palate, but they're also less nutrient dense than some of our brightly colored vegetables and our green leafies. So, the fact that corn even counts as a vegetable could be up for debate. It's more scientifically like a grain. Now, let's slide right into number 4, because those starchy vegetables can turn on the kids and adults' dopamine systems, right? When we're getting sort of that hit of like really quick energy, because things like potatoes, corn, white flour, any processed grains or sugars, including fruit without the fiber, like fruit juice or fruit slushies, they give us kind of a quick hit of quick energy, and that sort of dopamine system turns on, and they're very comfort food. When you think of comfort foods, generally they're pretty high in starch because those are comforting. Now, for a picky eater, they crave those comfort foods and they want that dopamine feedback loop. And so if they're getting more of it all the time in school lunch, potentially that could contribute to them staying in those pickier tendencies. Similarly, in school lunches, and especially, maybe not especially, it just depends on the school. Some schools, some daycares have a pretty regimented schedule where you're going to see the same main course and or the same sides rather frequently. In fact, a friend of mine who works at a daycare said it feels like every Monday through Friday is the same. So every Monday is whatever it is, chicken nuggets. Every Tuesday is spaghetti. That means those kids are getting a fairly small variety of foods. And again, that can contribute to picky eating, because the less variety kids are given, the less they're going to eat and the more they're going to expect the same pattern over and over. And then when something tries to break that pattern, it's very difficult for them. So the fact that some schools have maybe a 2-week or a 1-week rotation, and we're seeing these same foods and these same sides over and over, could potentially contribute to picky eating. We also know that kids who are picky eaters, if they food jag, which food jagging means eating the exact same food every day, which can happen with school lunches, especially as we go into middle and high school, because schools often offer pizza every day or burgers and fries every day. They have some of those same options every day. And it makes it really easy for a child to food jag, to eat the exact same food every day. I know in our district, in our elementary schools, they have their main course, which does rotate, although not with quite as much variety as I would love. But they also have what's called a yogurt meal. And I think it's a yogurt and a muffin is kind of the main course. And then you get similar sides as the other kids. So could a child be eating the same thing every day? Well, they actually could. And sometimes regular old picky eaters, if they go on a food jag, they'll generally get tired of that food. They'll drop it for a while, and then they'll typically bring it back in. But it's very risky, because the fewer foods a child eats, the less nutrition they're getting. The fewer foods a child eats, the closer they also are becoming to being labeled a problem feeder, which is 20 foods or less. Another hallmark of problem feeders is that when they food jag, in other words, eat the same thing every day, when they get tired of that food that they've food jagged on and they drop it, it never comes back. So I always tell parents, you know what? Even if you don't have a problem feeder, avoid the opportunity, the possibility of a food jag, because what if your kid drops that food and they never bring it back? Now you've got one less on the list of, the short list of foods that they'll eat. So it's a danger when we do the same thing every day. Now, do I have my kids take a yogurt just about every day? Actually, I do. And if I ever thought it would become a problem, I would cut that. We do that so that we have to think less at night. And it's actually something I recommend and have recommended in the past to parents. It's like, just pick something that's just the same every day. However, I make homemade yogurt, so it always has a little bit different consistency week to week. We include different fruits in it. So it's not exactly the same, and it's not that precise consistency of highly processed foods. Did you know my oldest son, Paul, and 4 of his friends wrote a cookbook for kids a couple years ago? It is the first and so far the only real food cookbook written by kids for kids. And I have to give Chef Junior a huge shout out as today's podcast sponsor. This book is packed with 100 recipes that kids can make, and they're leveled from beginner to advanced. So your littlest kids and your teens can find so many delicious foods to love. Again, this is written by 5 kids. They put together this cookbook when they themselves were between the ages of 9 and 12, and it launched in 2020 when they were between the ages of 12 and 15. It is so inspiring for other kids to see what children do in the kitchen and what they have put together, and to read words written by actual peers of their own. You can learn more about the book Chef Junior and how our kids put it together, and also get some special bonus gifts just from our kid authors. Go to kidscookrealfood.com/chefjr. That's kidscookrealfood.com/chefjr for all the fun bonuses, background scoop, and ordering information. And now we're going to get into some of these factors that I think are probably less important, but they're still really fascinating to think about. For example, number 6 is that when kids are eating at school, and this is actually any at school, they don't have a feedback loop and they don't have any modeling from adults on how to encounter food with curiosity instead of fear. Also, the adults in their lives don't get as many chances to observe their children for those 5 Ps that I talk about in my TEDx, those physiological root causes of picky eating: pain, palate, processing, pressure, and power. So it's a little harder to troubleshoot. Now, this basically applies to every child who eats meals away from their parents or guardians. So that would be daycare, that would be school, whether you send your own or do school lunch. But it's also something to think about that we do need to model a good relationship with food. We need to do that in the context of meal times. And so when our kids are at school or daycare all day and we are working all day, and maybe we're coming home exhausted and it just doesn't feel like we can create a family dinner. So we toss some food towards our kids, we let them eat, and we put them to bed, and then we sit down and have a PB&J ourselves, right? That's a specific example that I know happens in some families, even mine, in really busy phases. But no matter how busy we are, we've got to prioritize that family dinner at least a few times a week. And I've spoken about that many times in other posts and other healthy parenting handbook episodes. We will connect you to those in the show notes, which again are at kidscookrealfood.com/038. Any kid eating at school doesn't have that feedback loop and that modeling from adults, no matter what they're eating. Now, many school and daycare lunches are a gluten and dairy fest. If you were to look at a month of school lunches, at least in my district, almost every day, and I'm tempted to say every day, but I'm not sure that that's actually factual. Nearly every day, both gluten and dairy are prominently incorporated in school lunch. And those are really, there's some top allergens. A lot of kids are walking around with undiagnosed gluten and or dairy sensitivities. Not maybe allergens that, allergies that are like tested in the blood, but for a lot of kids, gluten and or dairy can cause sort of a low level of pain throughout the day. And they just think that's their normal. They wouldn't even be able to tell you that they're in pain because every single meal has gluten and dairy, and it's really hard to cut it out if you're eating out of the house because it's everywhere. So that could be a contributing factor. Number 7 is those portion sizes. Since I was a student teacher observing kindergartners eating their free breakfast in Lansing public schools, I thought, holy cow, these are not appropriate serving sizes. For our kindergartners, it's way, way, way too much food, double at least what they can pack away in the minutes that they have to consume those breakfasts and those lunch. For our 5th graders, maybe our 6th graders, for kids in a growth spurt, it might not be enough food. I've heard from teachers recently who say it's crazy to serve kindergartners and 5th graders the same amount, because not only is we're creating a ton of food waste for our kindergartners, but our 5th graders, they actually aren't getting enough. So how can we do that as a school system where things do need to be systematized and scalable? I have no idea. I don't know the answer to that, but the portion sizes could be a problem. Now, how can this contribute to picky eating? Not so much for our 5th graders who aren't getting enough, but for our kindergartners who are having a massive tray with, 6 items on it, and they're feeling like they can't possibly eat it all. Number 1, that can be very visually overwhelming. And for some picky eaters, especially those who have some sensory processing issues in the visual range, that's going to shut them down. It's going to shut down their appetite, the simple fact of having so much on their plate or tray. Also, does this potentially create a habit loop of, I don't finish my meals. I throw away lots of food every single day, every single school breakfast, every single school lunch, right? That when that becomes a habit, I think it's maybe easier for kids to just assume that they'll never finish their meals. And it also, I mean, it just teaches kids that it's okay to throw away food. Not that I am not a member of the Clean Plate Club. If you've ever heard me speak, I do not think that kids should always finish their meals. However, I do encourage parents to try to help children serve an appropriate amount for them so that it's not overwhelming, so that they feel like it's approachable and doable, and that they can hang out with their food and not be nervous or overwhelmed that there's so much going on. So portion sizes, that's pretty tricky. Again, kids do better when they're served an appropriate amount of food. Second from last is my favorite, actually my least favorite. This is the one I step on the soapbox enough. Number 9 is the massive amount of sugar in our school breakfasts and lunch. There are currently no governmental federal restrictions on how much sugar can go into school breakfast and lunch. There are a lot of federal structures, a lot of federal stipulations. Nothing about sugar, which means that in my book, an excessive amount of kids' calories who eat school breakfast and school lunch are coming from sugar. Is sugar necessarily bad? I mean, yes, but it's not PC to say that anymore. Here's the deal. For sure, it is true that sugar replaces nutrients that kids need. So if kids are not getting enough nutrients because the sugar has pushed out actual vitamins and minerals and protein and building blocks that they need for their bodies, then it is doing a disservice to them. I'm quoting Jennifer Anderson of Kids Eat in Color on Instagram here, who said that 17% of calories from school breakfasts come from added sugar. 17%. So that's pretty close to 20%. Imagine your plate and go 1/5 is sugar of breakfast. So if we extrapolate that out onto lunch, that's a lot of sugar. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no more than 24 grams of sugar per day for children, and 24 grams is 6 teaspoons of sugar. That's not very much. Okay, that's not very much for a whole day. So I guarantee you 17% of the calories in the school breakfast are sugar. That first of all, it's too much for kids. It is pushing out other nutrients because kids just can't consume that many calories. Second of all, if that's 17% of the calories in the breakfast, the portion of breakfast that is thrown away is probably the non-sugary portion. And so the kids are eating thereby more than 17% of their calories in school breakfast from sugar. I think sugar is a beast. I think it's a huge problem in our society. It's way too accepted, and I cannot wait to see some regulations on the amount of sugar that's allowed to be in school lunch, and to see all those highly processed foods having to reformulate and choose some new ingredients, because it's killing our kids. It's killing our kids. Finally, number 10, this is pretty lightweight, is that with school lunches, kids can drink milk to fill up. And also that they are often drinking their sugars, both because strawberry and chocolate milk are offered, which have added sugars, but also because the milk has to be low fat. Like they can't even, I don't think, serve whole milk. So it's either reduced fat or skim milk, which means the percentage of lactose, natural milk sugars, is higher because the fat and protein percentage is lower, which means it's less satiating for our kids. But in the short term, they can easily fill up by just drinking their milk first. When I send school lunches, I don't send a drink with calories, because I want my kids to get their calories from their protein sources, their fruits, their vegetables, their grains, etc. It's way too easy, especially for a picky eater, to fill up on milk and then eat nothing else. My friends, those are my 10 reasons why school lunch food may contribute or increase picky eating tendencies. I think the same applies to daycares, some daycares. Again, my youngest was in a daycare for preschool 3 days a week, and we chose to send our own lunch because they served very highly processed foods, very low variety, and it just wasn't what I wanted my 3 and 4-year-old to get used to eating, to get into the habit of eating. I wanted his habits to be formed on whole foods, homemade. that was my choice. My friend who works in a daycare says it's very much the same as that she is seeing currently 5 years later. And particularly that rotating menu where it's very much the same every single week. That's really going to train our little ones that food is limited and that variety is non-existent. And we don't want that. So that applies to many daycares. There are also many daycares who do have chefs who actually make food homemade. And in those daycares, especially if the teachers are using helpful words and phrases and maybe gently encouraging or creating a positive environment where kids can try new foods and they have the positive peer pressure of lots of other kids doing the same thing, those daycares can actually improve picky eating tendencies because the kids are getting variety. They're getting introduced to new things. They have that positive peer pressure. They have a safe environment in which to try new things. I don't think, daycare lunches are one or the other. It just depends what kind of daycare you have, how it's staffed, the choices that the management has made, and the policies and personal reactions of the teachers. I do think daycare is a place where parents can more quickly enact change because each daycare is generally, some are probably federally funded, but generally an independent unit. And so change can happen faster. So if you take your kids to a daycare and you see that ultra processed, very kind of monochromatic menu, maybe talk to the management. Explain why this could encourage picky eating and see if you can make some changes. It's quite possible to happen there. I don't think change is quickly possible in at least public schools. It's a big systemic problem. So what can we do, right? What can we do? We've got to talk about the practical. What you can do about school lunches is, first of all, and I'm taking a page again from Jennifer Anderson at Kids Eat in Color, is let's make sure that we don't say things like school lunches are unhealthy. Let's make sure that we don't allow our children to disparage or criticize the school lunch food in front of other kids. Why? Because although your kid may have options, other kids may not. And kids who really need the calories and the nutrition that is in those school lunches, particularly free and reduced lunches, don't deserve to have any stigma put on that lunch, right? If that's your only option for food and other kids are saying, oh, that's so unhealthy, or oh, that's so gross, some kids will take that to heart and they won't eat. Okay. And then I love learning from Jennifer Anderson because she's got a very different worldview than me. And I think she hits the nail on the head sometimes. And that's definitely one of them. And we'll link to her Instagram post where she does a lot of teaching about school lunch. Now, she's also a fan of free lunch for all. I don't think that that's going to be the solution necessarily because free lunch isn't free lunch. That's really called taxpayer funded lunch. And personally, I would rather decide where my grocery dollars go rather than the government deciding for me. So is free lunch for all the way to solve the problem? Again, I don't think so. It's very controversial, but that would be another podcast in and of itself, wouldn't it? So I will link you to Jennifer Anderson's great Instagram post where she does some teaching. She cites her sources and the comments are, as always, fascinating. But I always end with the practical, don't I? The Healthy Parenting Handbook always ends with the handbook, the action steps. What can you do if you don't want your child to have that school lunch every day for some of these 10 reasons or your own other reasons? Honestly, guys, you got to pack your own. You got to send your own lunch. I think there can be a balance. Maybe you let your kid choose one a week or a certain number a month that they can circle on their school lunch menu and have some school lunches, because pretty much all of my 10 factors that could contribute to picky eating happen when the child has school lunch every single weekday for 8 to 9 months of the year. A school lunch here and there is an 80-20 rule. It's no big thing, right? It is a fun way for the child to be able to go out of their norm. So if you make your norm, we pack, and you let your kid have a school lunch here and there, whatever, no big deal. If your child needs to have that school lunch every single day, then I encourage you to create some sort of feedback loop so that you're at least talking about the school lunch and talking about the choices they make and beginning to understand what that feels like for your child. Because I do think that most of these factors that may contribute to picky eating can be curbed or turned around with a little bit of parental oversight, which is awesome. Now, if you have the energy, absolutely try for systemic change. Can we get more real whole foods in our school lunches and ultra processed foods, less and less? Can we get some gluten-free and dairy-free days where kids' bodies get a little break from the gluten and dairy? I do say if you have the energy, because systemic change is a long slog and an uphill battle. And it's possible that you could work really hard and nothing will come of it until your kid is out of that school. It's also possible that you have, maybe a smaller school or a charter school or a private school where systemic change can happen much more quickly. So I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm just trying to be very realistic. For tomorrow, what you can do, for the next day, what you can do is pack your own lunch. And I've got a lot of resources both on kitchenstewardship.com and kidscookrealfood.com on lunch packing. We've got some videos, we've got an ebook, and some really big posts that we will make sure we link to in the show notes at Kitchen Stewardship, helping parents think through variety in their school lunch and making it doable. Because I get it. That's one more thing. And it's definitely easier to just buy the school lunch, or if your state happens to have free lunch, obviously that's super, super easy. We just have to be cognizant parents, and we have to think through all the potential ramifications of that which is easy, because sometimes that which takes more time is more worthwhile. Once again, I'm Katie Kimball for Kids Cook Real Food and the Healthy Parenting Handbook. You are so warmly invited to join me for more of this, but much more positive action step, science geek information about picky eating and how that plays out in your family and at your dinner table. Join the No More Picky Eating Challenge at kidscookrealfood.com/picky challenge. I cannot wait to do that with you. No matter when you're listening to this podcast, there will be another one coming up within a few months. So go to that link, register, get yourself on the wait list, or hopefully we're kicking off that challenge October 1st and 2nd. 2024. I look forward to seeing you there, because making small changes is how you see real change happen. And I don't believe any child has to become an adult who says, I'm a picky eater. I believe all people, all humans, kids and adults, can have a healthy relationship with food and can have preferences. Those coexist. We can have a healthy relationship with food. We can be as adventurous as our physiology will allow. And we can still have some stuff that we just won't eat and we don't like. And that's called preferenced, not picky. Once again, I'm Katie Kimball for the Healthy Parenting Handbook. I will see you back next week.